This is Writer's Mosaic in Conversation. John Siddique talks to the author Lanre Bakare about his debut book, We Were There.
Lanre Bakare was born and grew up in Bradford in West Yorkshire. He's a correspondent for the Guardian newspaper covering arts and culture, where his writing tends to focus on the intersection of art, race and culture across multiple disciplines. He was the senior correspondent on the award-winning Cotton Capital project and has worked both in New York and Los Angeles as part of the Guardian US team. His first non-fiction book, We Were There, which explores how black culture, resistance and community shape modern Britain outside of the bubble of London and the M25, is newly published by the Bodley Head. Hi Lanre.
Hello.
It's lovely to be here with you, sitting in this lovely park. How do you say the name of this place?
Tredegar.
Tredegar?
Yeah, Tredegar Square.
See, I was going Tredegar,
Well, I'm saying it like I actually know. I think it's Tredegar. Most people I know say Tredegar.
Right, fantastic. Yeah. And we're sitting, it's a beautiful sunny day, and some child has drawn lovely chalk things all over the ground, which is a great setting. And so we thought we'd come outside and have a chat.
It could be a child. It could be Eddie Peake, the artist. I know he lives around here somewhere. So he might have done it.
He might have done it, right?
He might have done it,
okay,
yeah. Or Danny Boyle, he lives over there.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so zombies might turn up as well.
Yeah, bloody hell.
But I want to begin by giving the end away of your book.
Okay, fine.
The last three words of your book are, because your book is called We Were There.
Yeah.
The last three words of your book are We Were There.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'd like to ask you, are we there yet?
I mean, we're here, aren't we? In this park.
No, but I mean, you know, you're talking about sort of like, you know, the journey to being seen.
Yeah.
Your book in many ways is about overcoming erasure, I think, through the necessity of telling these stories.
Yeah.
And digging into, you know, kind of as unyet, until your book, unwritten history.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, given that you have said we were there, are we here?
Right.
At this point in time?
Yeah.
Where do you think we're going?
I mean, I think the fact that this book is coming out now in April 2025 shows that we're not, because a lot of these stories will be news to many British people. I obviously think that they're really important and should be part of our kind of national story. To give you an example, I mean, we might talk about him later, but George Linder, that case in Bradford, he was a textile worker who was wrongly imprisoned, and there was a big campaign to get him out. Real landmark case. You know, growing up in Bradford, I didn't even know about that. You know, it was like you needed these little passwords or these little, you had to kind of be guided down the right route via some sort of treasure map to kind of know about these things. And I think that's, for me, growing up, it was way easier to, for example, learn about Malcolm X than it was to learn about the black population of Bradford, even though I was part of it. Yeah. I mean, it's I think for me, and this is part of a lot of my work, not just the book. I also worked on Cotton Capital for the Guardian, which is all about the Guardian's connections to transatlantic slave trade, and the piece I wrote about that was about Manchester and the way that it deals with its history, and how, actually, when you look into it, multiple people have hosted big exhibitions that have been about black history in Manchester, going back to the 70s. Curriculums have been created that went into schools, yet the civic memory of that city does not recognise it. So, like, that's the thing you're going up against, like permeating that and actually get it into the national consciousness, which is really difficult. But hopefully something like this, something like the book We Were There, will help. There's been a great reaction to it so far, which is really exciting. I think a lot of people, when they read the stories, want to know more, and this isn't supposed to be definitive. It's supposed to be a jumping off point. So hopefully we'll get there. But yeah, I don't think we're there yet.
No, I absolutely loved it, and I mean, if we're not careful, this will be a sort of 4-hour conversation. So I'm going to try and keep it short, because there's just we were talking before we pressed the record button, because you were born in '84 and I was 19 in 1984, and then I was 20 in the second part of 1984. And yet many of the things you've written about in the book, I was actually standing in the place that you're actually talking about, you know, which I find absolutely incredible. But I just felt a real sense of thankfulness, actually, at your book, because just as you've described, the history hasn't permeated, and it seems like there are history books missing off our shelves. And it kind of got me to thinking, what other history books are kind of missing. But I'd like to just sort of inquire your process in a way. How did you arrive at just wanting to create this?
So the way it worked was I actually interviewed Steve McQueen after Small Axe came out, which is 5 films about Black British life from, I think it starts in the 60s and it goes through to like the early 80s. And there were 5 amazing films, and I interviewed him, but at the end of the interview, kind of instinctively, I was kind of umming and ahhing about whether or not to ask him this, but I just said, like, you've done these 5 films, they're all based in London. Any one of them could have been based in a different part of the country. I felt as if it was a missed opportunity, and he said, well, I hear what you're saying, we might do a second series, and that's what we're kind of bearing in mind. After that, I brought the interview up, and then I also did a piece where I kind of expanded on that idea and looked at what was missing, and looked at the fact that, like, if you looked at the BFI's top 10 Black British films, that I think they're all based in London or are all written by Londoners. Same with The Guardian, and that kind of goes through culture. So I wrote that, and then I got an email from an agent and said, this could be a book. At first I was like, I don't think it can be. I didn't really want to do it at first. I was kind of working on another idea, actually. And I kind of thought about it and spoke to a few people, and they said, look, if you're going to write a book, it's something you've got to be really passionate about. So I kind of started sketching out what it might be and loved that process, and then it just went from there.
So what was that hook of passion? What was the thread that you found?
Knowing that these stories are out there. So, for example, with Small Axe, there's a film about Alex Wheatle, who's an author, quite famous. But he was arrested after 1981 in Brixton, and the Small Axe film was about Brixton in 81. And I knew, for example, you could set that in Liverpool, and it would be amazing, like the stories you'd have from that city. I'd heard about things like the George Lindor case that I referenced earlier. There were certain things that I always thought were really fascinating that I'd never seen really explored in the context of blackness. For example, rugby league, that's another thing we might talk about. So yeah, I had all these stories that were kind of in my head, and I thought these stories change the way you think about blackness. They'll change the way you think about Black Britishness, because at the minute I still think it's the case. Like, for a lot of people, Black Britishness begins and ends with London stories. And that's where the authentic blackness happens. That's where authentic black culture comes from. That's where authentic black politics is based. But I just don't think that's the case.
How has London come to be the claimant of that authenticity?
Well, I think to like zoom out for a bit, you've got to look at how strange our country is in terms of how much power is placed in the capital. There aren't many countries that do that. Like, for example, America, power is kind of fragmented. You have politics is in DC, culture is in New York, entertainment is out on the West Coast in LA, you have tech out on the West Coast, tax avoidance is in Delaware or whatever. It's quite fragmented and all these different sources of power, whereas in the UK, especially after the period we're talking about, where you had the Big Bang in the City of London, so much power was centralised. So I think that's a big element of it. I think for many years the majority of black people did live in London, so like it does make sense that London stories would be the majority. But I think growing up for me, I noticed that if, say for example, there was a BBC 4 documentary about reggae in the UK, it'd just be based in London. And I knew that there were sound systems in Bradford like Scorcher, there were bands like Steel Pulse in Birmingham, that were part of that story. And often people would reach for, the examples I use in the first chapter, which is about Northern Soul, I kind of write about in the period in the late 70s. If you're going to talk about like black and white people uniting, it'll be the Rock Against Racism concert that happened in Victoria Park down there. That'll be the big thing. Or it'll be Don Letts playing reggae to punks at the 100 Club, at the Roxy, sorry. And that's the shorthand we use to kind of explain how the country was changing. And I just think the stories that are drawn from, they're just too slim. And there are so many different stories that kind of widen our perspective and kind of add a different texture to it.
It's obviously Wigan Casino, as you've mentioned, the Reno in Manchester. Yeah. I was a Hacienda boy myself.
Right.
And saw that change. I was telling you before we pressed the button, you reference the Hacienda and Mike Pickering, and I used to garden for Mike Pickering. So he said to me, "Do you like dancing?" And I said, "Yeah." So I work in this club. If anytime you want to come, just say, you're a mate of mine. And so I had sort of like free access to the hacienda, and but watched it, as you say, switch over from one thing to another.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, there was always something kind of, Tony Wilson was always trying to kind of, I think he knew where the money was. He was always kind of like betting on black culture, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he said that, like, knowing where the money was. When I spoke to Hugh and Clark, who was the first resident DJ there, who'd come from the Reno, who's a black Mancunian, he was saying that he thought Tony Wilson was mad for trying to get black music in there, because at the time it was seen as so marginal, and like it was really outside of stuff. Like, going to the Reno was, that wasn't a mainstream thing. If you were just like a lad from Oldham, whatever, you were not just going to pop down to the Reno. You go in there for a reason. I think Tony Wilson was a visionary in that sense. But I think the Manchester was fascinating because Hacienda, because this is why it's not just about it being London-centric. There's also this thing that happens where the story of a club like that, it becomes post-87, or 88 actually, and it's like, Ecstasy comes in, it's Acid House, that's the story of Hacienda, but there's 6 years before that, which is just completely ignored. Like, William Burroughs was going down there on a Tuesday night and stuff to read poetry, like, fascinating, mad stuff. Linda turning up and doing performance art, like, really, really interesting. And for me, those moments where the culture hasn't quite formed are always the most interesting.
Absolutely.
Where there's multiple different things going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, instead you get this kind of singular story, which is easy to digest. It's really simple. And I think that's why, for example, journalists, some authors, documentary makers like to reach for that stuff, because it's easy. You can do it in an hour. Yeah. Whereas the truth is, obviously, I mean, I've barely scratched the surface, and that's like 100,000 words.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was your process for scratching the surface? I mean, just in terms of literal sort of mechanics of your book, you kind of open each chapter with a kind of story almost of, like, say, Wigan Casino, or something happening in Manchester, something happening in Bradford, and so on, Birmingham and Liverpool. And then you kind of, the story kind of opens out, and then you have a lovely way of kind of bringing things back in again. It was very enjoyable to kind of be taken through that, because it's unknown territory to me. I come from a different background to you. And it's interesting, you and I have these parallel lives, 20 years difference, but these kind of, parallel lives, but kind of different worlds that kind of don't know each other. And yet we're talking about literally the same places all the way through. But I just wondered how you, as somebody who is, 39, 40 years old?
40, yeah.
40. I'm 60. It's terrifying. Sort of we're able to penetrate that history. Is it, it feels more than just research. There feels like there's a kind of a heart to what you're doing in this. Yeah,
I mean, I'm glad you said that. That's a massive compliment. I think where I started was trying to, because like I say, there's 20 years between us. I've got to try and get into this era which comes before I was born. So there are ways to do that. Obviously, talking to people is the obvious one, which I did a lot of. But also I did stuff like, I talked to a friend of mine, Mark Seeley, who runs Autograph, which is a gallery in East London, specialises in photography, and like especially for global majority artists. And I spoke to him at the start and said, look, I'm doing this book. Is there anything from the period you recommend? And he said, you should get this book by a guy called Clement Cooper. He's from Manchester, from Moss Side. And it's called Presence. And he started it, I think, in 86, and it goes through to 88. And I just sat with these images, and I mean, they're absolutely amazing. Like, some of them look like Caravaggio paintings. Like, they're so well constructed. And he'll be in like a pub in Moss Side, like there's one called the Robin Hood, and he kind of follows a guy through there, and he'll be at a church, and then he'll be at a club, and like it just gave me a sense of like what this place looked like, almost like what it smelt and felt, and like something tangible. It was like I just tried to kind of look at these things. I also did that with documentaries. There's an amazing documentary filmmaker called Bea Freeman, who's from Liverpool. I watched a lot of her stuff. Went back and watched a lot of political interviews with Thatcher, Heseltine, Willie Whitelaw, like all these figures from the era. Callaghan, who's someone who I think is, he's quite a big figure in the book, and someone I was really fascinated by. Isn't written about enough, especially in terms of his stuff in relation to race. He's a really interesting guy. So just going back and like trying to absorb all this stuff, which was a bit overwhelming actually. I think as a process, it was it was difficult. I was trying to kind of watch too much stuff, and like the first draft was just a bit of a mess. Like there was just everything was in there, and thankfully I had a really good editor, and I was able to kind of take the time to kind of hack back through it. But yeah, just watching, listening, talking to people, reading as well. I mean, we said about kind of missing books on the bookshelf. Actually, there's been a lot of stuff that's been published. It's just never been properly.
No, as you say, it hasn't penetrated the mass consciousness. How do we do that? What are we going to do?
I think some stuff just needs to be reissued. Like Ferdinand Dennis, Behind the Front Line, is an unbelievable book, which I stumbled on when I was about halfway through writing. I read another book by an African-American anthropologist called Jacqueline Nassib Brown, called Dropping Anchor and Setting Sail, which she wrote in '89 about Liverpool, about Black Liverpool. I quote it a couple of times in the book. And then she referenced Ferdinand Dennis's book. And that's a travel log. I think originally it was a Radio 4 programme, and then he turned it into a book. And it's just unbelievable. Like he's going around, he's doing what I did, but it's a travel log kind of thing. So he's interviewing people, he's traversing. There's a lot of his own personal opinions in there. He isn't always complimentary. He's probably a lot less complimentary than I am. But it works. I mean, he's very honest, and he's got his opinions. But yeah, there are plenty of books like that which are fantastic and maybe came out on small presses. I know Bernardine Evaristo's doing stuff at Penguin where she's reissuing stuff. That's maybe the way forward.
What I'm thinking is this kind of. I mean, we have you at the Guardian, of course, which is fantastic, and it's kind of putting a book out is not enough. I've seen so many books come out and just disappear, just sink from people who deserve to be read. Part of the work we do with Writer's Mosaic, for example, is not just about new writing. It's about sort of recovery and discovery and kind of a representation of work at times. And it's very easy to always think that the new is the way forward.
Yeah.
But actually honouring writers and thinkers and people who have kind of not come before, but who should have been read, is a process that we absolutely have to engage in.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, my book, there's about 100 pages of notes in there of references. I think I need to do a reading list, a proper reading list for the paperback. But like, there's just so many references in there, and I wanted people to see like how deep we went with the research, but then also have a resource for themselves where they can go to, Bradford Local Studies Library and pick up a copy of Bradford Black, which was a community-run magazine, which has amazing stuff in. Absolutely incredible. I mean, hopefully We Were There will have an impact, but I think there's loads of stuff. I mean, Jason Okundai's book last year about black gay men in Brixton, Revolutionary Acts, absolutely brilliant. Neef's book, Where We Come From, which is all about kind of hip-hop, but like as a nationwide survey. I think that helps build up a head of steam. And it's definitely made it easier for me to come through. Rennie Edo Lodge's book as well, from that sold 1 million copies. It's absolutely incredible. So yeah, I think there is an appetite to understand things more and understand race in a more sophisticated way in this country. I think the debate in general is terrible in this country, and I think people have had enough of it.
Do you think we're finally moving beyond where when we write a book or create a film or a TV series that we have to explain ourselves to the colonial masters? Who own the publishing company or whatever, Do you think we're kind of getting beyond that? Like in my own writing, I stopped explaining what certain words mean. I just leave them in, like the Toni Morrison thing.
Right, yeah.
In fact, I took it from Toni Morrison, if I'm honest, which is that I don't explain anymore.
Yeah.
And I've watched my sales go down.
Well, it's interesting because, my experience with doing this book was there were certain things that perhaps my editor, who's a lovely guy called Stuart Williams, a white guy, didn't understand the significance of. Not many, just a few things where I had to really be like, and push, which is what I expected, but it wasn't like I felt I had to dumb things down. I tried to make the writing accessible in general because I think that's important. I want everybody to be able to pick this book up. I want a 14-year-old to be able to pick it up and be like, yeah, this is something I can grasp. But yeah, that is a tough one because I don't think we are there. Because like I say, like the conversation in general around race in this country is absolutely terrible. Like if you watch a televised debate about say like when Black Lives Matter kicked off, you watch a TV debate about that, and it'll be, the first question will be something like, "Is Britain racist?" And it's like, oh, and you won't really get beyond that, because there'll be an argument. They'll talk about that for 15 minutes or whatever, and then, sorry, we've had enough time, and that's it. You never get into the meat of it. You never really begin to understand what's going on.
But that's a purpose tool, isn't it?
But this is, so that's a really interesting
doing
point.
things in that way is elite capture. What I can never remember the guy's name who wrote the book Elite Capture.
Oh, Taiwo, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who basically demonstrates that the minute you try and talk about something, there'll be a way of capturing it in the way that it's framed, or you place somebody who can kind of pull the rug towards being the biggest victim in the room,
Right.
kind of towards them, so that they kind of capture the space.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's just TV debates, isn't it? I know Ash Sarkar's book's out at the minute, and she talks about that. And
it's a bit of a theme at the moment.
Yeah,
I think we're finally seeing through some of that.
But then people engage with it, don't they? I couldn't do what she does, or what. There's some other people who do that, and they really engage with, GB News, or even like ITV or whatever, BBC. I just find it really hard, because my work is I like to think it's quite nuanced, and I'm trying to kind of get at complexity, and I'm not trying to present a simple picture. But that's what broadcast wants. So we'll see anyway. I mean, I'm about to do some more press for this, so maybe should talk after that. I'll let you know.
Well, that'd be interesting. Maybe we'd do a part 2, in a little while.
I'll go mad back.
The kind of the road-worn Lanre, and with your battle scars. Yeah. I've been having the road. Let's. What was it like for you growing up in the sort of 80s and 90s in Bradford? Then were you a kind of like an artistically sort of sensitive young man?
I mean, I suppose a side of me was. I mean, always loved reading. Always loved my music. But I was also like, I think as a kid, mixed heritage kid in Bradford, I grew up in quite a working class white area, Shipley. I've thought a lot about this recently. When I was a kid, I just wanted to kind of fit in. And I felt like the way to do that was to kind of, football was big. I've been to football. I've been to it massively. And I love football, like it's great, but I joined my team and I was with my mates, and like I was kind of protected in this kind of collective, and that's like where I wanted to be. And as part of that was like, not necessarily letting people know that, you're into reading Doris Lessing or whatever. I mean, I wasn't really reading Doris Lessing when I was that young, but maybe Kafka or something. Or like Chomsky and stuff. I was reading that when I was like 15 and taking it into school and being like, "Sir, media class, like, what about this? What about linguistics? What about media control?" But yeah, that was, I definitely had kind of an artistic side. I always loved writing. I used to write my own little short stories when I was a kid. They're always like really violent, actually. There was a series that I did about Cutlass Island, which is kind of about these pirates. Fairly bonkers. I found it not that long ago. But yeah, and in general, growing up in Bradford, I mean, it was an amazing place to grow up. It was a class place to grow up. There were challenges, of course there were, but I think the story about Bradford that's presented is just like way too simplified. Like it's such a
Bradford's
complex
amazing.
place. It's incredible.
It's an amazing city.
If people, I mean, I say this in the book, like if people talk about race in Bradford, usually it's a very, very limited story, and it's always it'll be about South Asian people, it'll be about white working class people, and like this kind of conflict, and obviously some of that went on, of course it did, but so much more to it. I went to first school, and like the kids with the most exotic names were like Kowalczyk, Lawalski, Andrzejewski, Safranowskis, like they're all Polish lads. It's more complex and nuanced, and I'm glad I grew up in Bradford. I think it's given me a good base.
And if you go now to a coffee shop in Bradford, you see entirely mixed groups. It's not, you can find the polarisation if you want to,
Yeah.
but you kind of like the younger people coming through are kind of not having it.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, they're just like, no, we are it.
Yeah.
Now, and so what I was wondering is you're in Bradford in the 80s and 90s. What starts kind of calling you towards journalism, writing, and ending up as arts and culture at The Guardian?
Well, for the arts and culture element of it, I think I was always into going to the Media Museum. So I used to go there all the time. So the cinema there, Pictureville, it's the biggest independent cinema in the country, I think that's right. And it was always dead cheap. So it'd be like, I think at one point it was like $2.50 with your student pass, or for under 18s or whatever. So you just go and see like and it was really well programmed. Like I remember seeing like Kurosawa, seeing Raging Bull 70mm cut, like all these amazing things. And that was a key kind of way in. Going to see like Don McCullum. He had an exhibition there. I know he's a Nigerian connection there. He went to obviously cover the Biafran War, then came back and went to Bradford, which I always found fascinating. So yeah, I think that was my basis for kind of enjoying the arts and culture and actually feeling pretty comfortable in those spaces. I know a lot of people talk about, going into a gallery and being like, maybe coming from a working class background and saying, "Oh, is this for me?" But weirdly, I think going to the Media Museum all the time, I felt that was my space, and I was never meant to feel unwelcome there. So yeah, that was a key thing.
But what brought you in the first place? What? Because I come across so many people who just would not cross that line.
Right.
Even now, kind of thing. The arts have been sort of pulled back so much from people. I'm working across the north these days, kind of looking at how we can kind of advance the work. And people are so disenfranchised from even knowing that art exists. Right. I think a lot of the time.
Okay.
So, what gets you through that Pictureville door?
Oh man, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I don't know if I could pinpoint like one particular thing where I was like, that was it. I saw, a John Ford film and I thought, I'm going to go to the cinema. I don't think it was like that. I mean, I got really into like Scorsese, like through I remember seeing Mean Streets and being like, what is this? Like, this is just completely... I'd never seen anything like it. And wanted to see more of it, and then eventually thinking, actually, the cinema's the place to kind of go and experience that. But yeah, my family's not particularly... not massive book readers. It wasn't like we were getting taken to dragged around art galleries all the time. My granddad he's no longer around, but he was really into Dickens. I remember him having a Dickens collection and being like really impressed by that. One of these kind of like leather bound, I don't know when it was for. I actually took some of them to university when I was studying English. My professors were like, what the hell is that? Having said that, we did have quite a lot of culture in the house, but that was like Fela Kuti, it was, Shina Peters, it was Colinton, it was a lot of Nigerian music, a lot of Fuji stuff, King Sunny Ade. My dad loves his music. Some Nollywood was on TV, but I also kind of like, in my head, that's kind of quite, growing up, I think I kind of saw that as like Nigerian stuff that's kind of over here. It's not, it's kind of different from going to the Pictureville or whatever. But yeah, I don't know, that is a difficult question for me to answer and just be like, I don't think there was ever one like key turning point. I just felt comfortable there, and I loved cinema and I loved culture and seeing exhibitions, seeing photographs, going and be able to get that close to them and having a good look. Yeah. Then
you move on to journalism. Did you study journalism?
Yeah, so a key thing for me actually was media studies. So media studies was still a big thing, which comes out of cultural studies and Stuart Hall, who's obviously in the book. And then we had a really good media teacher, Mr. Gledhill, and he encouraged us. We made our own films. We made one for A-level called Prospect Street, and it was about a guy. I starred in it, and he got a payday loan, and it was a bit like Ken Loach, like Ken Loach when he did about 0 hours contracts and stuff and payday loans. It was like that, but like 10 years before, and we did it, me and my mates. We're very quite political. So yeah, that was big. And feeling like, for a while I was thinking maybe like making films would be the way to go. But I always liked writing. It was just something I loved doing. It was something I've always done, whether it's for like school newspaper or uni newspaper. Did a little bit there. Did my own blog for a while, which was about a baseline house around Yorkshire. If you know that movement. And yeah, it was just something I always wanted to do. And then when I went to uni, I did English, which kind of left it. I kind of felt as if I left it quite open-ended there, so I could kind of figure out what I really wanted to do while I was at uni. Journalism was always a goal, but I didn't know if I was absolutely going to do it. And then I had a year out, in which time I was thinking I was working in a call centre for like N-Power, and I was thinking I can't do this. This isn't right. And I applied for the Scott Trust bursary, which is run by the Guardian, and I got that. And then studied in Sheffield for a year, and the rest is history. Just kind of went on from there. But yeah, that media studies course was really important. Yeah, our teacher really encouraged us to like read deeply. If you brought Chomsky in, it'd be, I think as soon as we did that, it was like, these guys are engaged. So let's watch La Haine or whatever, and he like put that on.
Wow.
Remember watching
There's
that.
no coming back from that one, is there?
Yeah.
Really kind of thing. It's a game-changing film.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely astonishing. One of the things, it's funny, one of the names you don't see mentioned very much as the kind of architect of Thatcherism and all that kind of has come out of it. I still feel like we're in Thatcherism, quite honestly. But I just see Keir Starmer with the same hair as Thatcher. But you're one of the few people, because I say this name to my wife and to my friends at home, and they just look at me, and I'm like, but it all begins with Milton Friedman, Right,
yeah.
And you talk about Milton Friedman in there, and I don't think I even have a question. I was just like relieved on a personal level
Right.
that somebody else kind of recognises that kind of. It's not the starting point, obviously, but but it's a hell of a step down, isn't it?
Well, it's the theoretical ballast that it's all based on, right? And like, I think even because Friedman, like towards the end of his life, like really distanced himself from the idea of monetarism. Said actually this isn't the way to go, and Thatcher and that cabinet just the embrace of it was just completely bonkers. Like when you look back, and I mean it did fundamentally shift everything in this country, realigned us economically, politically. Obviously, we've shifted further to the right, and I agree with you actually. The idea of we had this recently at work. There was a debate about who we were going to support at the next election. I think Polly Toynbee brought up this idea that we're still in the Thatcher era, and I think there hasn't been a fundamental shift since.
No.
You could point at Brexit, but I think Brexit wasn't new. Thatcher was deposed because of an issue around Europe. Europe's always been there. That's not what. It was obviously a big shift. We came out of Europe. That's massive. It's seismic. But like there wasn't a realignment, and there hasn't been a new idea, of how to run things. Like, New Labour. What's that Thatcher quote? Like biggest victory was the existence of New Labour, and it's right. I mean they didn't try to rebuild the post-war consensus that had gone. They didn't come with a new idea. They just carried on.
Still those old Friedman 1948 economics. It's still that theory, isn't it, in play?
Yeah, I mean probably not as aggressive as what you're seeing from like 79 to like 82.
No.
Andy Beckett's written really well about that. That book Promise You a Miracle, which is great. I mean just like, we're going to let the market decide. I mean, it's absolutely insane. and the reality of that is it just the churn you see everywhere. And obviously black people are on the front line of that, but so was everybody. And I think that's why I was a bit, I tell some people, it's based in the Thatcher era. A lot of people kind of not either recoil or kind of lean in. Because I think some people like want to know more. I think some people just don't ever want to talk about it ever again.
No, I don't think even though we've kind of lived through it. And I remember I was in school when she was made Prime Minister. I was like my last year of school. And then I remember those years up to the miners' strike and all that. And then there's a happening that occurs in 1985 that I think is absolutely kind of axial, which is a thing called the Battle of the Beanfield, which I don't know if you've come across the Battle of the Beanfield. Yeah. And I was actually like a kind of a hippie-ish kid on my way down to go and stay with the peace convoy when the police kind of stopped them in that lane, beat the living daylights out of everybody, dragging pregnant women out of buses and beating them down in the road and things. And then this guy called Lord Savenate kind of pulled everybody into this forest and said the police can't come on my land. But in that moment, it felt like what began in 1979 had taken hold completely at that point, and kind of the road to Brexit was paved, as it were, in 1985. And somehow, I can't explain it, but I can just kind of feel it, as it were, sort of genetically almost. And yeah, so it's a wonderful thing, I think, that you've named Friedman, as it were, because, as you say, the Thatcher era isn't really examined and talked about. It's kind of got this monolithic sort of status, but nobody actually delves into it and its kind of aftermath, really, does it?
It was the 40th anniversary of the miners' strike, and there was a few documentaries that were made during that period, and I feel like with every 10 year that goes by, and they'll do a new round of documentaries, that's often based on like the personal experiences of people. So they'll look at a family and it'll be someone who went on strike and someone who didn't, and you just get more and more out of people. And I mean, I think it is fascinating. There's also a bit of me that thinks it is massively oversaturated in some ways. Like that kind of iconic image of Thatcher, and like she's kind of locked in stasis, and you know it's the Iron Lady, and they'll talk about the Falklands and like the stuff that I mentioned in the book, but nothing else. And it's like there's all this other stuff going on, which is totally forgotten about. And as well as us lurching to the right, and again Andy Beckett's written really well about this. What people forget is like people who were defined as like the loony left, they won the argument. They won the argument on like LGBT rights. You know, we've got gay marriage in this country. Like they absolutely won it at the time. They were, you know, Section 28, all the rest of it. I mean, when it comes to race, it's slightly more complicated, but there were big advancements, and things that run counter to that idea of like Thatcher just won and everybody else kind of had to eat it for a bit. I think there was always massive pushback.
No, there was a real feeling of growth towards the 90s and through the 90s, and then it feels like that's kind of being pulled back now. To me, it's like trying to undo that, you know, and yeah. Last thing, and then we'll close up for this time round. But I think we should have a round two after you've been on the road for a bit. I think you're absolutely right. I think nobody has presented a vision of kind of moving forward. You're reminding me of something Bell Hooks says, which I'm going to paraphrase absolutely terribly. But in order to move forward in any way, there has to be imagination. There has to be a vision, at least, of a step forward. And she also talks about the importance of kind of rebellion, I suppose, of sort of taking a step into the unknown. So I just wondered, since you're a younger human being than I, if you have a vision.
Me?
Yeah.
Political leader, Lanre Bakare.
Yeah.
Do I have a vision?
Not necessarily political, but just unless we begin to envisage, because the thing is, we may be afraid because we sound naive, or who am I to say? But who are we not to say? You know, I'm always reminding, I teach meditation as well as being an author. I'm always reminding my students that when they're going on about the society and it's all like this and it's all like that it's their world too. Yeah. And it's our world. Yeah, totally. And unless we actually have the guts to envision, then we ain't going nowhere. So I just wonder, you know, because you have literally created a missing history book.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful, profoundly so, actually. But, Mr. Historian, so given that you've done the research, what would your vision be? In the smallest of steps?
Yeah.
What's a small, realistic, visionary step that we could make?
I mean, it was interesting going back and doing the research for this book, and like going and discovering groups like Abyssinde in Manchester, which was I don't write about them that much, but I did quite a lot of research about them. They were a black feminist group led by a woman called Kath Locke. Also Eloise Edwards was a big figure in there. And they, with basically nothing, were able to build this kind of community. They had a small place, which was actually a school, which is run by someone from Bradford called Ruth Big Booner, called Rekindle. They're in the same building as Abyssinde. And they invited people in from the community, and they taught them about black history, and they taught them about themselves, and they instilled a sense of like who you are and where you come from. And I think, obviously, I don't have a big political vision, but one thing that I think is really important is that we're able to, I mean, you talked before about us being 20 years apart, and yet there's some connection, and that's a theme that runs through the book. I don't know if you picked it up, but like, we have kind of been in these situations before. Like when I was finishing the book was just after Southport, and like everything was kicking off there, and it felt like, you know, that could have been something that happened in 1975. You know, in fact, I think it's worse than something that happened in 1975. But because we have this disconnect between our history, and we always see it as like a new thing. Where's this new problem come from? It's always been there. So perhaps my vision is for people to be able to see this history and see it's connected, and see we have been here before, we've been in similar positions, and with, like Abyssinde, with basically nothing, you could do loads. You don't have to become a multimillionaire and like get rich off Bitcoin and go to Soho House and like all these aspirational things that people seem really wedded to now. And like, I struggle with that. I just think that's not gonna make you happy. It's not gonna change anything. It's just kind of playing along with the game. So yeah, I don't know. I think looking backwards all the time could be a massive problem, but I don't think we kind of do it enough in this country, especially not from minority groups. There's some research that I read towards just as I was finishing the book. 50% of people in this country can't name one black British historical figure. And there was a TikTok I watched where there was a guy on the street, and this is obviously not scientific, but he was in Brixton going around talking to young black kids and being like, can they name a historical figure? And they just couldn't do it. And you wonder, like in the 70s, with the Saturday schools, with the kind of politicised nature of life then, they probably would have been able to talk about Mary Seacole, And I think, sometimes we look back and think it was all worse then, but there are lessons we can bring forward. But the idea of us seeing the past and understanding there are these connections, I'd like that to be something that people kind of take from the book, and understand that we can build something better, like it is possible, genuinely is. I'm not just saying that as a kind of like hopey, changey guy, like we've done it before, and it can be done again. It's just going to take a political will and stopping this kind of short-termism stuff. I think that's the thing that really kills it. My big hot take is that we need a strong Green Party. That's the obvious thing. The Green Party should be massive. They need to get their act together, because they should be pushing an open door. But we'll see. I don't know if that'll come to fruition. People who I know kind of close to it say they need to kind of professionalise and all that stuff. Whether that'll mean that they'll lose some of that political edge, I don't know. But Green Party. Maybe the Greens will save us. I don't know.
Lanre, thank you so much.
No worries, thank
Bless you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers, man.
John Siddique was in conversation with Lanre Bakare. To hear more writers, go to writersmosaic.org.uk.